I don't know. I mean, I have a long history with music, and I always find it. I have to describe it. Yeah, music is a part of everybody's life, right? I don't think there's anybody who doesn't have the doesn't have some intimate or personal experience related to music. It's something uh, very powerfully universal, and I think it's more powerful than people realize in general. Um,
Mhm.
if you go back and look at who was it, Pythagoras. Now, Pythagoras is famous for his mathematical equations. Yeah, the um, the equations that measure the size of triangles, for example. Yeah, Pythagorean theory. He wasn't the first
Mhm.
person to use that, but he's the person that we credit because he's the first person in written recorded history who used those those formulas. But they were used before because they were obviously used by the Egyptians when they built the pyramids and other temples and things and other civilizations. Um, anyway, the point is that the very little that we know about Pythagoras in that information is the fact that Pythagoras was a musician
Mhm.
and that he toured and traveled around the Mediterranean area using music to heal people who were sick.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he used music to heal people who were sick.
Mhm.
And we know that there's a resonant vibrational frequency related to human health.
Mhm.
There are certain tones that are healthy and certain tones that are unhealthy.
Mhm.
And music definitely has the ability to change people's mood and feeling,
Mhm.
lifts them up, takes them down. Very simple example. If I go for a jog and I listen to music, I jog faster.
Mhm.
And it's a little bit strange, but um, it's also true if you think about the beat and running to the rhythm of the music. Logically, you would, if you choose a faster beat per minute, you would run faster. Um,
Yeah.
uh, but this works even when you're not focused on it, right? Even when you don't focus on the beat, you run faster.
Mhm.
It's automatic. Um, we see this also with supermarkets. Playing music in the supermarket causes shoppers to behave in different ways. Playing
Mhm.
different songs makes people happy, makes people sad. Now, some people buy more when they're happy, and some people buy more when they're sad. Different products. Um,
Mhm.
but it's quite interesting. Also, playing different music at different beats. Supermarkets have found that the slower the beat of the music, the slower the shoppers move,
Mhm.
and so they spend more time in the shop.
Yeah.
So, question: how do you get people to spend more time in your shop? Answer: play slower music. There you go. And now it seems like a little bit of a it's tangential thinking, not thinking in a sort of straight line, thinking to the side. How do you get people to spend more time in your show? You play slow music, and it actually works because people tune themselves to the sound of the music, and um, music has been used down through history to manipulate the way people feel and think.
Mhm.
Churches are a great example of that, where music was used in churches to make people feel a certain way. In fact, if you go back in history and you look at, you take that reference to Pythagoras that I mentioned earlier, um, there is a theory that the music in churches was designed to create a resonant frequency to heal the human body of sickness. And that those giant organs that you see in churches, you know, da, 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 you know, it's a bit more melodic than that, but you get the idea. Well, those organs were not designed for music. Those organs were designed for medicinal purposes, for medicine, to create resonant frequencies that cause the human body to vibrate and remove disease.
Mhm.
Nobody talks about that, right? People think the organ was for specifically the singing of music. What is the name? What is the name of the instrument? What do we call it? We call it the organ.
Yes.
The word organ has two meanings: the musical instrument and the organs of the body. Each part of the body is an organ. So playing different pieces of music at different frequencies would affect different organs of the body, and through the vibrations could cause healing. If you've ever taken singing lessons, it's a strange thing to do maybe, but I have in my life taking singing lessons. It didn't help. I was still singing really badly. But one of the things that my singing teachers always told me was that when you sing, everything in your body must vibrate at the same frequency. If it doesn't, then you won't be able to sing properly. You won't be able to hit the right note. When you hit the note, everything's got to be in harmony throughout your body. If your body's not in harmony, you won't hit the notes. So yeah, there's a couple of actually scientific papers on the use of organ music to heal sickness in people. And if you look at Christian religious history, the organ probably did more than heal sickness. And I mean that in terms of the fact that sickness is not always physical, right? It can be mental as well. And that the vibrational frequency of the music was very good for the mind as well as the body, and it put everything in harmony. And why are there so many radio stations with music? Because in general, it improves the feeling and mood of people. This was discovered by the British government probably before the First World War, but definitely after the First World War. That when radio was first used nationally in Britain, the government discovered that people were statistically happier when they listened to certain kinds of music, whatever the situation. And if you look at the music from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, you have this sort of forget your troubles and just get happy. You gotta chase all your fears away. It was all about sun and happiness and bright things, and it was very much used after the First World War and after the Second World War to improve people's feeling and mood throughout the country, and it worked very well. It worked very well. And it was also well known that not only could music bring people up, it could also take people down as well. And things like jazz music with its semi-discordant scales was well known to be used in voodoo rituals in order to create certain feelings of I would call it madness, or some people would call it ecstasy, right? was super happiness, but it was really just a kind of madness. And you see it, people play music, or people hear music, and people dance, right? They've got a natural rhythm in your body. It's the rhythm of life. And it's not a song from The Lion King, Rhythm of Life, something like that. Anyway, yeah, and that's why all the early Disney films, and still today, have lots of songs in them, right? From the "You've got the bare necessities, the simple bare necessities, forget about the worries of you." That's Jungle Book. Right through to "Let It Go, Let It Go," the sort of Frozen soundtrack thing. Because it really does influence people's feelings. Now, beyond the music, you have the words, and the words are, in essence, memory patterns. It's also well known down throughout history that certain patterns, certain rhythmic patterns of words, are more easily memorable and can be used as certain kinds of programs. Things that rhyme. That's the simplest example is words that have the same sound. There was a young man from Bengal who went to a fancy dress ball. He thought he would risk it and go as a biscuit, but the dog ate him up in the hall. That's a little rhyme, right? But you know, that's the idea of how the words work, and we remember those words, and it's pretty deep, right? I kissed the girl and I liked it. The taste of her, was that Katy Perry or something like that, right? You know, it's teaching young girls to be lesbians, basically. Yeah, that's the subtext. I mean, you can read it as it's just a song. Or what was I was listening to yesterday? Michael Jackson, They Don't Really Care About Us. Yeah. All I want to know is that they don't really care about us. Or some, and listening to the words in that are really profound, and it's a very, very anti-governmental song. And the fact that it even got recorded and released is quite amazing. Michael Jackson was a far deeper artist than people gave them credit for, and people. He was a greater artist than people really understood. I think very misunderstood person. But yeah, the music is related to the drugs as well. You know, down throughout history, drugs have been used to control populations, and music was part of drugs. Just think about the Beatles, "Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds," which is LSD. Yeah. So, you know, let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields. Well, what the hell is that about, right? Or we all live in a yellow submarine. What the fuck, you know? It's just, you gotta be smoking some crazy shit to create that, right? Not to mention the Doors and their sort of trippy music. When the music's over, turn out the lights. Oh, people are strange when you're a stranger. That was great lyrics. People are strange when you're a stranger. Faces seem ugly when you're alone. Women are wicked when you're unwanted. Streets are up even when they're down. When you're strange. Do, do, do. Anyway, and then that segues into through the drugs culture. To things like Led Zeppelin, which then went into the dark side, the sort of Aleister Crowley symbolism, deep, sort of almost the deep, very, very heavy, discordant music, which is, I know I like. Don't get me wrong. I like Led Zeppelin. Don't get me wrong. But you got to realize that the music was very, very, very powerful in controlling people. What were the biggest songs of the 80s? Cigarettes and Alcohol by Oasis. Was that an album or a song? It was an album. It was their first album, I think. Was that their first? Is it my imagination, or have I finally found something worth living for? I was looking for some action, but all I could find was cigarettes and alcohol. Right. I mean, you got the kids singing that, right? It's like the biggest song of that period of time. It's about cigarettes and alcohol. So you're going to have that as part of your culture. Yeah, it was always, it was, it was always there. Whether it's good or bad, it depends how you used it. But music was definitely a way to bring people together and to cause changes. Music festivals, that's a powerful movement, and music has always been used to play with people's focus and attention. Films, films that that romantic moment in the film, or the quiet moment in the film, or the sad moment in the film, or the tragic moment in the film. It's got that soft music in the background, right? Or you got the thriller or horror film where it's da 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 da, ah, it stabbing music, or John Carpenter kind of keyboard music from I think he did the Halloween films or some horror films. And so I always find music quite fascinating, and I've always recognized the great power of it, which is why I spend very, very, very little time with music now, because I know how powerfully music can influence people, as from my little monologue there about how it affects people. And I know that if I want to know how I feel, what my emotional state is, really, I've got to turn off everything. Yeah. No music, no television, no noise, no conversation, no computer, no distraction, no mobile phone, no social media. I got to turn it all off. Yeah. And you get close to who you are. Yeah. And that's what matters most, is knowing that element of yourself, and then realizing that you can then add in music. But there's a lot of people who fill their day with noise. By noise, I mean music. Okay. There's a lot of people who fill their day with noise. From the moment they get up, they turn on the radio, and they get themselves started on the day. And that works for them. Great. Maybe they need it. Great. Everybody's different. So, find what works for you. But I specifically don't do that. Because when I wake up in the morning, I want to know, how do I feel really? Yeah. Not what is the fake pretend that I can absorb energy from in the environment. What's my real physical and mental state? So and you only get that when you don't have any distractions. When I drive a car, I've done this for the last 2-3 years. I don't play any music. I don't listen to the radio, and I don't listen to any music when I drive the car. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. You can get lots of good information from listening to the radio, and you can enjoy listening to music because music is good. But when I drive a car, I specifically don't do that, because I'm very interested in what reality is. Yeah, what is happening around about me, what is happening to me, and I want to be at some level, to some extent, in control of those things, specifically because our dominant belief system creates the reality around about us, and that is extremely important to understand. Not just affected by music, it's affected by food. Food has resonant vibrational frequency as well. Each object in the world has a resonant vibrational frequency, and food is the same. And you have to eat food that basically vibrates at the same resonant frequency as the body in order to stay healthy. We call it healthy food. We know what it is. We don't think about the fact that it vibrates, but everything in the universe vibrates at a certain frequency. So it's good to be aware of these things, and the highest, purest vibrational frequencies are in your fresh fruit and vegetables. That's what's the healthiest things are to eat. And so when I have a connection with music, it's like I know that it's really, really, really powerful, and that I think we have to be careful with it. I don't know, you probably don't know, but in the last couple of weeks, there's been a large number of protests in various parts of the world about various different problems, and governments have been trying to work out how to stop the people protesting. And one of the ways is to fire resonant frequencies of sound at the people to make them sick. And this is what governments do. Now, this is a fact. Governments have these special machines that fire resonant frequencies at people to make them sick. And what happens is, if you've got a frequency meter reading, like you can get these little machines. Yeah, there's people in these different protests around the world, people who know what's going on. They take these meter readings to the protests, and they're like, look, yeah, and the meter reading is just off the scale. It's like, because on top of the buildings, there are people shooting these resonant frequencies at them, making them sick, and giving them headaches and making them ill. It's also done with they also use radiation technology as well, and it's quite dangerous, because once you make people sick, there's no guarantee they're going to recover from the sickness, and it's pretty dangerous. But this has been used since the First World War. Actually, it was used it was a technique used in the First World War by different armies. They had they created these big speakers, and they fired these high frequency sounds at the enemy, and that ringing you get in your ears, like ee! Sometimes they used to fire that during the war at the enemies to disorientate them, make them dizzy, make them sick. And then they discovered, oh, we don't have to fire it at our enemies. We can just fire it at our own people, and they won't protest. And that's the power of sound. And everyone knows that certain kinds of music can make you calm and relaxed. And you ever notice the sounds of bells? You got like a bell, and if you notice, like those Buddhist temples have these huge bells, and it's like, boom, It creates that frequency that sort of relaxes the whole body. It's really interesting. And you know that here's a little bit of trivia. Maybe you know this. I don't know. If you've got a piano, yeah, and you got your keys on the piano, the middle key is a C. So you've got your C D E F G and then A B C. Yeah, and unless you're Slovak, where you've got A H C, the B is replaced with an H, which is just stupid, but that's life, right? Every culture has their difference. So anyway, on a piano, if you've got the same note, it's not just on a piano, anywhere. If you've got the same note, like if you've got these little forks, right, that you hit and zzz, they vibrate. If you've got a C fork and you hit it and it vibrates, and you've got another C fork, the second C fork will also vibrate. Okay, they vibrate at the same time. Yeah. If you hit a C on a piano, ding, and there's another C on the piano, the other C will play if it is tuned perfectly. The other C will vibrate as well. In fact, all the C's across the piano will vibrate, which is why when you tune a piano, you must never tune it perfectly. No piano is ever tuned perfectly. Because if it was, when you hit the one C, all the other C's would play at the same time. So when you tune a piano, you have to tune it so it's not perfect in order to actually play it properly, which is kind of interesting. That's a really interesting fact that pianos are specifically not tuned perfectly, because if you hit the C, all the C's would vibrate if it was tuned perfectly. So it's really, really interesting that that even the musical instruments have to be specifically designed to be discordant, to be not perfectly in harmony. And then if you realize that the musical instruments are not perfectly in harmony, then most of the music created by them is not all of it, but a lot of it is not in perfect harmony as well, which affects the body. And that's the power that's in the music. And people who have been involved, sometimes you find that people who have been involved in the music industry don't listen to a lot of music, right, anymore, because they realize the power that it has to control people and make them happy, make them sad, make them angry, start revolutions, make them more intelligent. You know, you can listen to 3 minutes of, or you can listen to an hour of Beethoven, right? In general, more intellectual people will listen to more intellectual music. Like it's actually more difficult to listen to an hour of Beethoven than it is to 3 minutes of drum and bass. But don't get me wrong, I like drum and bass. I think there's a place for it in the world. But I also appreciate Beethoven, Stravinsky, Mozart, Chopin. I don't like Chopin very much, but I respect Chopin. So, you know, the classical composers who, you know, we don't get that much classical music, unfortunately, anymore. But then that's the way that, if you look very carefully, that's the way that a lot of society is heading. Yeah, we don't get we don't get people writing symphonies. We get 3 minutes of pop music. Yeah, we don't have people building cathedrals, right? We don't build cathedrals and churches anymore. Cathedrals were the greatest work of human endeavor, you know, heaven on earth, right? And we don't build them anymore. We don't build cathedrals anymore. What we build is little boxes for people, with little boxes that people live in. And we call that our art and architecture. And, you know, don't get me wrong, maybe little boxes are useful, but cathedrals are also useful as well, and we need to. Right, and also, cathedrals were built over 250 to 300 years. This is so important. This is so important on a bigger scale, because how many people today build on a project that's going to be 250 to 300 years? Nobody. Why? Why does nobody do that? Because there's no profit in it, and they want money, and they want it now, and they want their profit, and they want everything to come back to them before they die.
Mm.
Whereas the whole aspect of the cathedral was that you contribute to something that exists beyond your life. And now people don't do that because focus is different. There's nothing wrong with focusing on now, don't get me wrong, but I think there are examples in the past where people could see beyond now into something bigger and something more. The people involved in music are usually of slightly higher intelligence than average. One of the reasons for this is music requires the use of memory. And learning to play a piece of music is training your mind.
Mm.
That's probably the most important aspect of why a child should learn to play an instrument. But there's two reasons, really. You can add into that more. One is it improves memory. It improves focus. It's really an ability to communicate something. If you're playing with other people, then you have to harmonize. I mean, music is not just music, right? There's a whole thing there, and learning to play a musical instrument is it's a skill that increases your intelligence, and it is very good for children to have that experience of learning to play the piano, or and I would say that people should have lessons in like piano or violin, or maybe drums, or something like that, because you can learn a lot from that. Guitar, I don't really think people need guitar lessons, because from my experience, it's quite easy to pick up and play a guitar. It doesn't, if you give it time, if you give it half an hour a day for 6 months, you will be a relatively good guitar player. It's not that complicated, and it's a skill that stays with you for life. So that all those little things, looking after the musical instrument, learning to tune the musical instrument, they're all sort of vital life skills. And I think that the music that we surround ourselves with matters much more than we think, or than we realize. You hear people when people like football, and they're really fanatical about football, and people say to them, "Oh, it's just a game." The fans get, no, you don't understand it. It's more than a game. And the same is sort of true with music, right? It's not just music. Yeah. It's more than that. It's an expression of yourself. And and your life, and we get to see the kinds of people that become popular through music, or certain lifestyles that are promoted. I mentioned jazz in the 1920s and 30s, and you had rock and roll in 1950s and 60s, heavy metal in the 70s and 80s, and all of the sub-electronic, what I would call now transhumanist drug cultures, where people were trained to take substances. I would say very much trained to use drugs. And the madness of crowds, it feeds into what's called mass psychosis and the madness of crowds, where groups of people, the actions of groups of people are much less logical than the actions of individual people. You can take an individual person and look at them and go, that's logical and that's not logical, and I understand what they're doing, or I don't understand, but still separate the information and understand it to some extent, or analyze it. But if you've got a group, it's very difficult to analyze a group. Yeah, it's very difficult to parse and understand the data and all the data points. And very often groups will make very, very, very irrational and illogical choices, because that is the madness of the group, where the individual is lost. Now, this is visible not just when a football team loses a game, but also when a society loses its mind, or even a company loses its way. Companies are unfortunately products of this as well, the mass psychosis, where there's one way, one direction, one type of thinking, and everybody has to have it. And if you don't have it, then you can't be part of the group, or part of the culture, or part of the society, or part of the team. And this is dangerous, because the greatest skill that human beings have is adaptability and flexibility, the ability to change. You know, if it's sunny, you put on a t-shirt. If it's cold, you put on a jumper. If it's raining, you have an umbrella. You know, the adaptability is a vital life skill. But companies very often, over longer periods of time, lose that ability to be adaptable. They fix themselves in certain ways of thinking, which is very simply, this worked before, so it will work now. But that doesn't take into account the changing weather. It doesn't take into the account the fact that human beings are not in control of the universe, right? It doesn't take that into account, and that's a problem, because we've got to realize there are things bigger than us that have more control and more power than us, that are the extreme forces of nature. You can build a house, but if a hurricane comes along, you know, that's the end of that. Yeah. And as human beings, we're stupid. You know, we build power stations where there are tsunamis, right? That's not very smart. We build nuclear stations where there are volcanoes. That's not very smart, right? Or, you know, where there are earthquakes, would be a better example. But we build cities where there are volcanoes, right? Pompeii, classic example in history. Or we have countries where there are volcanoes. Iceland, right? Iceland's a whole country built on top of a volcano, right? It's not really a very smart idea. Your whole island could go, right? And that would be the end of that. And there's nothing you can do, because the forces of nature are stronger. So I could very happily sit with my guitar all day, and there's a great application for phones called BandLab, which is like a whole music studio that you can get in your phone now, like an entire music studio in your mobile phone. It's just, it's just amazing.